right, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a Sunday night. End of the weekend is upon us here. We got Monday coming up pretty quickly. Hope everyone had a decent weekend out here. It is 9:54 p.m. That's California time out here. October 19th, 2025 is the date. Latest activity here shows looks like a 3.2 earthquake in the red flag out here. Looks like around the Philippines region. Also a 1.5 earthquake across California. Let's go ahead and start off here for this 1.5 Saratoga area. That is just off the San Andreas Fault Peninsula section. Nothing big going on out here for now. No big earthquake activity. Just a little one-pointer across the Bay Area. We got two earthquakes here. One this morning and one fairly recent, a 2.2 outside of Vallejo. But for the most part, the Bay Area pretty quiet. Down across the San Andreas Fault here, southern end, Pear Blossom, California. 1.1 in the last hour. Nothing big going on down here across Southern California for now. The Northern California area, nothing new to report out there for the most part. Excuse me. But I do want to double check the Cascadia Tremor map here this evening. And man, it's just definitely pointing northward here around the Vancouver Island ranges for 383 epicenters of tremor. If you go back here and look at the data that we've got here since about 2010 or so, this latest event is fairly significant in terms of the duration here. I don't recall anything of significant nature which began roughly began back in June or so. It's just been consistent tremor activity here along the Cascadia subduction zone with mainly south, and then it worked its way up north here. The total tally here in the last few months, I should say, man, that pretty much shows you guys. You know, I don't need you to point this out here. You don't need me to point this out. I'm meaning that's the entire length there of the Cascadia subduction zone. Vancouver Island ranges southward to Northern California. That does not extend any further south because there's not a subduction zone underneath Sacramento or Yuba County or the Bay Area. The subduction zone ends right about here. Therefore, you get the volcanic activity through Mount Lassen northward, Cascades and whatnot. But man, look at that. 29,000 epicenters. This is not a year category. This is only since June. So it's been pretty significant in terms of slow slip events out here. I mean, it's just been, there's really been no quiet period out here. It looks like in the June period, maybe there was a little bit of quietness, but yeah, it's just been consistent out here. So what does it all mean? Does this mean this is relieving strain out here, that we're releasing maybe the potential for a big earthquake activity? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Everyone from Harvard seismologists to myself here, the Earth Master, firmly believe, and scientific data confirms that slow slip events out here will only add to the strain out there along the locked area. This is doing nothing for relieving strain for a next big 9.0 earthquake out here. That is the facts. This is a slow slip event that occurs down into the subduction zone of the Cascadia as the Juan de Fuca plate further subducts underneath the North American plate. So as the two plates slowly slip past one another in the deeper areas, there's a low frequency vibration that's picked up called tremor. This is not volcanic tremor, okay, in that sense, but slow slip events. And when that occurs, it's picked up, but also at the same time, that's adding further strain up there across the locked area. So that's a pretty significant number, almost 30,000 slow slip events here since end of June, early July. Is that unprecedented? Well, it's. I'm looking back here on the data. As far as the thickness goes, and there's really not a whole lot of comparison here in terms of the thickness out here. So it definitely has been increasing out here, and whether it's unprecedented or not, that's another story. But definitely that the tremor counts have been elevated mainly south. They worked their way northward here recently around the Vancouver Island ranges, and it's a friendly reminder, folks, that we need to be on guard out here for some big activity. It could very well happen anytime. Mount St. Helens, we checked that earlier. Nothing new going on there. Northern California, as I mentioned, a couple earthquakes here. Bay Area, I noted that earthquake here across the Saratoga area. Southern California, one earthquake on the San Andreas Fault. Nothing major going on south. Yellowstone National Park, nothing going on there because it's the weekend, folks. There's not going to be anything showing up there on the USGS map until Monday morning after the review. Hey, USGS, I'm willing to help you guys out, and I will log in and review this data free of charge. They need to start implementing some public assistance here, because I get the whole government shutting down stuff like that, but that has nothing to do with the government shutting down. This has occurred years past. Doesn't matter if they're getting paid or not. It's a thing that happens every weekend. They don't report their earthquakes, whether the government is shut down or not. So I've been observing this for many, many years. No earthquake activity really to report. There are a couple smaller earthquakes there across the area, but in reality, it's very minimal. This looks like some wind and maybe some thunderstorms earlier in the afternoon. All right, one earthquake way up north into Lively. Is it really lively up there in Canada? Sudbury, Canada, 3.0. Wow, that's a little interesting earthquake out there this afternoon, early evening. Is there any pumping operations out there? Do we pump for oil out here? What's these? That looks like a railroad track. Looks like it's underneath North Star Lake, underneath this road here, about 6 miles or so. Interesting earthquake. Don't see too much earthquake activity out there. Really, nobody reporting it. As far as the go back here. There's really not a whole lot of historical data out here around this area. As you can see there around the epicenter, a little odd earthquake. We do have to watch these little odd earthquakes, and just because it's not a big earthquake, it doesn't mean it's not significant. It sits outside of a zone here, at least way up north here in Canada. Not a whole lot of historical data up there. So that's kind of why I want to watch things up there across the Canada area. They kind of show a general motion of the North American plate out here, and its potential stresses out here. So the 4-pointer out there across the Big Island of Hawaii, 4.2. That's a super deep earthquake for this area, 27 miles deep. There has been a number of earthquakes out here in the last 30 days. Specifically in this area, but nothing as deep as a 27-mile 4.2 that we've seen today. Now, most of the time, these deeper earthquakes are in relation to the added weight on the Hawaii Islands here, right? You got to think about this. This magma coming up from deep below, spewing out new land, and the accumulation of new land out here will stress the area along the Pacific plate and the Pacific basin out here. So these deeper earthquakes do trigger, or these the stress out here do trigger these deeper earthquakes in relationship to the stress among the Pacific plate. But we'll continue to watch that. I don't see anything that would tell me this is otherwise than the noted information there. Up into the Kamchatka Trench, 4.8. One of the latest quakes there in the last hour or so. A couple earthquakes there, 4 and maybe a 5 range. Looking at the area around the Philippines, what's that along the Manila Trench? Look at that. It's a 4.9 literally on the Manila Trench. So let's see what's going on here. See that? That just happened here in the last couple hours. A 4.9 magnitude earthquake, 6 miles deep. That would technically be the largest earthquake here in this area, probably in the last 30 days or so. Yeah, look at that. That's the largest earthquake, and that's very close here to the Manila Trench. The Manila Trench here is a very feared subduction zone there along the Philippines, and rightfully so, because this can produce a mega quake upper 7, lower 8 here, and there's really no historical immediate noted earthquake activity along the Manila Trench. You know, it's not like we can go back here in the Philippine Trench here and look at earthquakes in the last 70 or 80 years. But this area along the Manila Trench is very capable of producing some large earthquakes. And I've covered that here recently, and the concern for that here recently of a large potential. And we got a 4.9 stirring up very close to that. One has to wonder if all this stress here leading northward from the Philippine Trench definitely squeezing this area. That's definitely a concern here for some potential larger activity along the Manila Trench. That's not anything to joke around with. This is very close here and extends down to the Manila area. And the Philippines here definitely do not need any further large-scale damaging earthquake, which is, it's very possible. This is not fear-mongering. It's very possible to see a mega quake here, a mega quake there along the Philippine Trench. These guys, they live among a subduction zone that is highly accumulated with stress, and it does not take 300 or 400 years to build up a mega quake out here. Only at maximum probably 100 years or so, and some of these areas are surpass that. So I just want everyone out there around the Philippines to be safe. I really want to visit the Philippines one of these days. So, that's one spot on my list I want to visit. Nankai Trough quiet for now, but watch these oddball earthquakes out here, that are sticking out from the main areas. Those are signs that stress is increasing northward, and that's right smack dab on the Manila Trench. Mariana Trench back here, 4.5. Clustering going on out there across the New Guinea area. New Zealand 3-pointer down. That's a super deep earthquake underneath North Island. That's it's another area capable of big earthquake activity. Nankai Trough super duper quiet. What's going on out there? It's just, we got a big cluster of earthquake activity occurring across the Western Pacific, and it's stirring up a lot of big activity out here. I do think that there's going to be something bigger than what we've seen out here recently, bigger than the 8.8. I'm pretty convinced here, looking at the data, with all the activity down south here in the center portion and up north, that we should see maybe a larger activity quake out here above the 8.8 magnitude region. I hope not, but all data, at least according to my observations here, is pointing to something bigger happening out here within this. You can pretty much build a triangle out here of data, whether that's a Mariana Trench, Izu Trench, but it's all pointing here along this region. Just please be prepared. Deep, super deep activity. Look at that, a pair, or maybe a swarm of deep activity underneath. Looks like the Afghanistan area. What's going on? You build maybe a tunnel building out here. Probably not, but these are, they're heavily mountainous areas. A bunch of forests down there, 100 miles, 124 miles deep underneath this area. That is showing up underneath this region tonight. 2s and 3s out there around the Mediterranean. The Campi Flegrei fields that everyone seems to worry about. It's obviously an area of interest, but not an area of immediate concern. The Campi Flegrei fields sit up here in Italy. There's been a little swarm out here. Nothing big, though. There's 2s, there's 1s. But overall, it's light. It's very light earthquake activity out here. If we were talking about this thing inflating and blowing up like a balloon, we'd be looking at 4s and 5s and 6s consistently. Similar to Yellowstone, but unfortunately, a lot of people like to fearmonger this because of Naples here, very highly populated area. But it's an area of the ground here that it inflates and then it deflates, it inflates and deflates. I can't remember the word for it, but that's a very common occurrence out here. One of these days it'll probably blow, but there's no sign of that, So the fear-mongering is definitely a little on the amplified side here recently. So, all right, let's see what else we got here. I got to pay attention to my barbecue outside. 4.0 out across the southern area of Panama. It looks like maybe down here. Panama, there's a little 4-pointer stirring up. Some amplification here in the last 24 hours, but looking at the last 24 hours here of the earthquake 3D globe, it's a mixed bag. It's definitely a mixed bag of earthquake activity. But you have to think about this area here, right? Taiwan northward around the Nankai Trough, Japan northward. That's been very quiet while everything else is stirring up around it. So, the plate's moving. The Pacific plate, the things are adjusting out here. And if you look at here, the general Pacific plate movement here, everything's moving to northwest here. So all that pressurization there across Japan, Taiwan, when things are happening up north and down south here, you cannot ignore this area in between. You really have to pay attention to what's going on here around the Nankai Trough northward. The Izu Trench as well. These are major subduction zones that are behaving quietly. But when they're super quiet while everything else is stirring up, that's the time there to watch for some bigger earthquake activity. And that's the facts there. Looking at space weather activity here, we got, look at those solar loops there, the magnetic loops looping around 42. I think they're 42, 46. Massive area that's produced many M flares and C flares. Unfortunately, did not produce any X flare activity. That is, it's no longer a concern here for flaring activity. Looking at the current magnetogram, well, there's a couple different sunspots out here. I'm watching closely here, 42, 57. There's a little bit of complexity here, but man, nothing like 42, 46. So the flare threat this is pretty decent here. 25% chance here for M flare. X flare around 5% chance or so. So things are dropping in terms of the magnetic complexity within the sunspots out here. There is no coronal holes facing us, and quite frankly, here that 87, when it stirred up here a couple days ago, that's when we seen a couple sixes, even that 7-pointer in the Philippines. So this has been an ongoing observation here of solar flare activity, or solar activity, not CME, but coronal hole activity in relationship to earthquake activity. And in the last couple months, it's been amplified here. So is that our teacher out there in the sky? Our definite producer of earthquake activity? No. This has much more studying to be done than just a couple observations here. I've only been keeping track of this here in the last few months, actually last several months here, earlier this year. But there's a couple other YouTube channels here, and I'm not going to say any names, but the big time channels here that guarantee that the earthquake activity is increasing because of coronal hole activity. And there's a lot of viewers here that watch that channel. I appreciate coming over here and watching this channel as well. It's highly appreciated, and I'm observing and reporting this activity myself in real time. So we're all kind of studying this ourselves here. It's not like he has his channel and he's the master of discovery, but we're all kind of discovering this ourselves here in relationship to the earthquake activity that gets elevated, surprisingly, when there's a coronal hole facing us. Pretty crazy, huh? Right? All right, so let's go ahead and check this out, see if there's anything else going on here across the planet. Newer earthquake down across the Atlantic. That's actually new. The Atlantic's been pretty quiet out there. Very, very quiet. So there's a 4.6. If you look at the last 30 days, the Atlantic has been somewhat active, but it's eerily quiet. It does look like it's working its way down south here with the latest activity, but it's unusually quiet there for earthquake activity around that separation there along the Atlantic. That's a rift boundary. The rift boundary pretty much explains there the separation of the the continents. South America here fitting into the Africa area. This all fits together. We studied that in grade school, but when things stir up out there, it does seem like everything tends to get elevated out there for the general plate stress. It's pretty active out here in the last 24 hours. A lot of 4s, a lot of 5s. No big earthquake activity, but it's amplified. Definitely amplified out there. We do have to watch areas up north because everything's filling in south. It only makes sense there when you look at the general plate stress map. As everything's filling up south here, everything's building up northwest along the Japan area. So the Nankai Trough is an area of major concern here. Watch that area specifically because of the concern of built-up stress. Not a prediction, not a forecast. This is just observation, okay? If you heard me talk earlier this evening about, there's been a couple social media. Are they influencers, or maybe just social media artists? I guess they claimed that there was they pretty much guaranteed that there was going to be a major earthquake in the South Bay. I see a 1.5 in the Saratoga area, South Bay area. So I really hope that that person would not guarantee that that's the mega earthquake they were talking about. So, anyway, I myself, like you, look at everything out here in terms of geological activity, earthquake activity, and there's quite a few of us out here that claim to produce there's going to be big earthquakes. I'm not part of that, okay? I don't forecast earthquakes. I don't pinpoint earthquakes. I look at areas of concern where stresses are elevated. Say, for example, if we've seen Southern California lighten up here with about 30 earthquakes of red magnitudes, that means that the stress out there along the Pacific plate and the North American plate are increasing in this direction here, right up against the San Andreas Fault. So that makes sense here to watch the San Andreas Fault. But that's not forecasting and guaranteeing an earthquake out there. It's just it's social media has just gone crazy recently. I don't want to get started on that tonight. I really don't. But anyway, let's go check out the rest of the space weather activity. Really nothing major going on. Yeah, nothing coming up here in a couple days here. So we are watching potentially a West Coast storm out here. I'm very disappointed. In fact, I'm getting a little depressed right now because that big time atmospheric river that I thought was coming into Northern California, well, I'm looking at only 200ths of an inch of rain here in my neck of the woods with that storm. Things have changed here, unfortunately, with the weather forecast out here. I'm disappointed. I really am. There's no major atmospheric river event there, which kind of looks like it's gone. It's gone like the wind, so to speak, and I'm very irritated about it. If you look at the upper dynamics here, the wind. Let's see here. Oh man, 200. Is it going to be the 250? No, I don't need to do that. But right about the 25th or so, boom, right there. That still looks promising for the Northern California area northward, but the precipitation totals out there are not looking good. And it's just, I'm always looking for promising storms that come up here along the West Coast. I'm looking for mega precipitation out here because I really don't want sunshine and blue skies. A lot of people love to live their lives around the blue sky and 80 degrees and sunshine. They don't want to deal with the wind. They don't want to deal with the rain. They don't want to deal with the snow. I'm not that person. I want that. So draw me into that area, so to speak. I've lived out here in Northern California the majority of my life, and it's not my fault. My parents moved out here. I was born out here. I've traveled across the country, but as far as a great perspective move here, it's very dependent also on a number of factors. Like Missy Mimi's here is my other half, and she's got kids here. We're rooted, so to speak, out here. So it's not like I can take off anytime I want to. But man, it's Northern California is part of the desert Southwest. I want to live up here, probably around the northern plains. And you know what? Before you say, "Oh, it's cold out there. You'll never survive," please sign me up. I'm a survivalist. I have many things here that probably blow people away. I definitely would live in the cold, no doubt about it. I don't need sunshine and 80 degrees year round. All right, I'm gonna check my live stream here. You may. Yeah, I live in the world of hot, no doubt. I love the rain in California. Tyler, definitely. Bill, I get it. You're from Hawaii. It's temperate. You get those average temperatures there. But it's all got to depend on your survival skills, how you're capable of surviving in your own reality, so to speak. It's I'm used to the temperatures here in California, but I can definitely adjust to colder weather. Yeah, yeah, I know that about Northern California, 50 degrees or so along the coast. Yeah, so Tyler Burbeck here mentioned about and I was talking about this earlier. I'm not going to mention the channel name, okay, just out of respect. They said there was a guaranteed chance, and these guys are Tyler's shown a 95% chance that the Bay Area was going to see an earthquake larger than the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. I know exactly the channel that you're talking about there, Tyler. I don't follow him, but I've seen him pop up in my feeds, and he's always saying, "Oh, there's going to be a big earthquake here today because of magnetic elevated activity." And I've been researching this here in terms of magnetic elevated activity, and there was a magnetic elevated event prior to the Loma Prieta earthquake. Um, but does that prove that you can forecast or predict earthquakes? Not necessarily true. It's something that has to be more looked at. Similar to the coronal hole activity, right? How can we say with definite scientific evidence that coronal hole activity directly influences earthquake activity here on the planet? We can't. Because, yeah, just because the last 3 or 4 times has been elevated with earthquake activity in relationship to the CME, or not CME, but the coronal hole activity, doesn't mean for sure that that is scientific data, because I've seen in times past, years past here, where we've had a massive coronal hole facing us for days. Nothing happens. Very minimal earthquake activity. So, the guy there I know exactly who you're talking about, okay? I do. I definitely do. And I want to comment on it, but I so don't want to. Appreciate the kind words there, Tyler. Pebble Beach, maybe I'll have to move down there. Maurice, yeah, Fort Bragg is that's like my second home. I always go to Fort Bragg. I'm always going to Fort Bragg with the kids and Missy Mimi's. We stay at a couple places out there along the coastline, mainly north of Fort Bragg, and it's super expensive though. I've looked at the housing out there, and it's super duper expensive. I do not want to live in town. I don't want to live in Fort Bragg, personally. If I were to live in the Fort Bragg area, it'd have to be outside the city limits, and we're talking about housing in the almost close to $1 million out there. It's pretty expensive, but it is beautiful. I know the weather is beautiful out there. So, if I could pinpoint an area I would love to live, it's probably about Fort Bragg northward here along the Oregon coast. But you know what? Look what lives out there. it's this is something that it's something that we're going to have to deal with eventually here. I do feel like I'm living in this time period here of 2025 so I can experience, document, and live this earthquake that's going to happen out here. The Cascadia subduction zone. We all have that calling, so to speak, right? when it comes to, well, I have a calling to write books. I have a calling to sing. I have a calling to teach children. You know, everyone has that calling in life, and they realize that. But I have my calling, and it feels like I am here on this time period, this timeline, to experience a big Cascadia earthquake. I've always had dreams about it. I've always felt it. And, here I am. It hasn't happened yet, but man, I think it's getting close out here. All right, quick glance here at the seismograph stations. Pretty quiet there, folks. So, just FYI. Yeah, you're right there, Tyler. Fort Bragg is, it's not safe. It's along the Northern California coastline. Oh, Star Wars. They just reminded me of my barbecue out there. So I got to go. Thank you so much, Star Wars, for reminding me. At least someone's thinking about me. I got my barbecue going outside. And how long's my update right now? Let's check this out here real quick. Oh, man. Okay, 36 minutes. I do need to go outside. So we'll catch you guys out here tomorrow. Appreciate it. The member drawing, we're going to hold that tomorrow, okay? We're at 162 members. We're going to pick out 3 winners, folks. That's 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I mean, that's a good odds there, right? 3 people out of 161 or 162 people. Hello. That's some good odds. We'll see you guys out here for the a Monday morning update, and then, of course, the drawing tomorrow afternoon. Stay safe, everyone.